I had always loved the smell of turpentine and oil paint in Paul's office. It smelled of possibilities, of ambition, of the future I imagined for my art. Today, though, the air was thick with something else: tension, heat, and betrayal. I pushed open the office door, expecting Paul hunched over his desk, reviewing my latest sketches. Instead, I froze. Paul's jeans were half unbuttoned. Nina, my own muse, the girl I had trusted to inspire my work, was pressed against him, whispering and laughing softly. And my newest canvas, the one I had labored over for weeks, was spread beneath them, a backdrop to their intimacy. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, my heart pounding in a rhythm I hadn't felt since my first rejection at art school. I swallowed hard and tried to speak. Paul, Nina, my voice was brittle, strained, like a pencil snapping under pressure. They both jumped, scrambling, and Paul's face turned pale. Celeste, it's not what it looks like. Oh, really? I said, my voice louder now, carrying through the empty office. Because it looks like you're using my work, my space, and my trust for your own amusement. Nina's eyes were wide, guilt and fear flickering across her features. Celeste, Don't, I snapped. Don't explain. Don't apologize. I don't want to hear it. Paul reached for my arm. I jerked away. You're mine to ruin? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. This canvas, this commission, all the work I poured into it, and you use it like a prop for your affair? Silence. They didn't answer. They couldn't. I walked out without a word, leaving the office door swinging behind me. Each step away from them felt like a cut and a liberation all at once. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing. I couldn't stay in that gallery under Paul's shadow, under his betrayal. That night, I sat in my studio, staring at my other works. For the first time, I saw them differently. Traces of trust misplaced, colors I had chosen for him, not for me. The thought made my stomach churn. I took a match and touched it to a canvas. The flames licked greedily at the paint, curling edges into blackened ash. I couldn't save my old art. It was tainted, but I could destroy it. And from the ashes, something new, dark, and raw could emerge. The fire reflected in my eyes. My dark period was beginning, and the world wasn't ready for what I was about to unleash. The first morning after I burned my old canvases, I woke up to a studio filled with smoke and the faint scent of charred oil paint. My hands were still shaking, but a strange exhilaration pulsed through me. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt untethered. The betrayal by Paul and Nina had left a gaping wound, but in that wound, I found freedom. I stood before a blank canvas, trembling slightly. It was nothing like the carefully curated work I used to produce for Paul's gallery. There would be no soft pastels, no polished strokes designed to please others. This was mine. All mine. I dipped my brush into thick black paint, letting it smear across the canvas with abandon. I shouted my anger into every stroke, my heartbreak dripped into every line. Colors collided violently. Reds, blacks, purples, and streaks of white cutting through like shards of light. The shapes were raw, jagged, and alive. I didn't care if it made sense, if it looked beautiful. It just had to be true. Hours passed, and I didn't notice. I didn't eat. I barely drank water. I painted until my hands cramped, until my back ached, until the world outside my studio seemed to disappear completely. When I finally stepped back, I stared at the canvas and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Power. Anger had become art. Betrayal had become creation, and every dark emotion Paul and Nina had triggered in me was now something tangible, something extraordinary. That night, I posted a photograph of one of the new pieces online. Just a single frame, no explanation. I went to sleep wondering if anyone would even notice. By the next morning, my phone was flooded. Messages from strangers, collectors, and fellow artists poured in. They called it raw, revolutionary, haunting. Some said it reminded them of pain they had hidden away for years. Others said they had never seen color bleed with such honesty. I didn't smile. I didn't even feel relief. I just felt the momentum building. I had unleashed something new, not just in my art, but in myself. Weeks passed, and the dark period became more than just a label I had given my work. Galleries reached out. Critics praised my courage. Orders came in from cities I had never imagined visiting. And through it all, Paul was nowhere to be found. He called once, begging for a meeting, claiming he wanted to reconcile professionally. I ignored the message. I didn't need him. I didn't need anyone who had stolen from me. One afternoon, while painting a massive canvas drenched in deep crimson and charcoal, I heard a knock on the studio door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Celeste. A voice called cautiously. I turned to see Felix standing there, grumpy as ever, arms crossed, eyebrows knitted. My friend had warned me about his stubbornness, and now I remembered why. I've been following your work, he said hesitantly. And, well, I've been buying it, quietly, for years. I blinked. You? You've been buying my paintings? Yes, he said, scratching the back of his neck. I didn't want to make it weird, but your work, it speaks. And I want to see more of it. Not for anyone else, but for me. I felt something shift inside me, a warmth I hadn't realized I was craving. Felix, the one who had always been distant, who criticized and teased my choices, suddenly became more than a friend. He saw me, really saw me. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt a spark of connection that wasn't about power or control. And I realized maybe the dark period wasn't just about anger. Maybe it was also about discovering who I truly was and who could stand beside me as I emerged from the ashes. By the time the third week of my dark period rolled around, the studio was a chaotic storm of paint tubes, brushes, canvases stacked haphazardly against the walls. Every corner held a fragment of rage, sorrow, or defiance. The air smelled of turpentine and wet paint, thick with creativity. And somehow it felt like freedom. I had stopped checking Paul's messages. Ignoring him felt too easy. I wanted to forget entirely that he had ever mattered. Instead, I immersed myself in this new language I was developing, brush strokes that shouted, colors that burned, canvases that screamed truths I had been hiding from the world. Then one morning, an email caught my attention. It was from a Paris gallery curator I had never heard of. "We are interested in exhibiting your work," it read. "Your recent pieces have a raw intensity that cannot be ignored. Are you available for a solo show this spring?" My hands trembled. I stared at the words, disbelief mingling with excitement. Paul had once told me that my style was marketable but safe. Safe. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Safe had been a cage. Raw had been freedom. I called Felix that evening, pacing my studio with a brush in hand, still streaked with black and red. "Felix, they want me in Paris," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond at first, just listened. Then he said softly, "You deserve it, Celeste. You've earned it." Earned it. The phrase felt foreign and comforting. For so long, Paul had dictated my success, deciding what would sell, what galleries would accept. But now it was mine. Every stroke, every color, every emotion on those canvases belonged to me and no one else. Within days, more inquiries poured in. Critics, art blogs, even some major collectors had caught wind of the dark period. I felt both exhilarated and terrified. The more I created, the more attention I drew, and I realized this wasn't just a temporary phase. It was a rebirth of who I was as an artist. Late one night, as I added a final flourish to a canvas drenched in stormy blues and fiery oranges, the familiar bitterness returned. I imagined Paul, smug and arrogant, realizing that I no longer needed him, that my work no longer depended on his gallery or his approval. A small smile tugged at my lips. Let him watch. Let him understand that betrayal only made me stronger. Felix arrived unexpectedly that evening, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a look that was both exasperated and impressed. "You're obsessed," he said, setting the cups down. "Look at this place, it's a hurricane." "I'm alive," I replied, brushing a stray streak of paint from my cheek. And I'm finally creating for me. He studied me, eyes narrowing slightly, and I caught the faintest flicker of admiration in his gaze. "I've been buying your paintings for years," he admitted, voice low. "I didn't want anyone to know. I wanted to see you paint." I froze. My chest tightened. He wasn't here to take control, to manage my career, or to critique my work. He had been silently supporting me all along. And now, in the midst of chaos, I realized I had found someone who believed in me, not the version Paul wanted. As he left that night, the city lights reflecting off the studio windows, I felt a surge of clarity. This dark period, this storm of emotion and paint, wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming myself, my voice, and my life. And maybe, just maybe, it was also about finding someone who could walk beside me, not in my shadow, but alongside me, as I stepped into the brilliance of my own creation. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of my studio, catching flecks of paint on the floor like scattered stars. The space was a mess, a chaotic testament to months of work, but it was mine. Every brushstroke, every canvas, every abandoned sketch belonged solely to me. And for the first time, I felt untouchable. Paul had tried contacting me again. Emails, calls, even messages through mutual acquaintances. He claimed he wanted to talk professionally, to reconcile. I didn't open a single one. My heart no longer throbbed with hurt or anger. It burned with purpose. I set up a new canvas and began working, letting the colors flow without restraint. Deep reds, inky blacks, streaks of silver, all bleeding into one another. I was creating not for galleries, not for critics, not for Paul or Nina, but for myself. Each stroke was liberation, each smear a declaration. Around midday, Felix appeared at the studio, arms crossed, his brow furrowed like he always did when he was about to scold me for something. "You've got paint everywhere," he said, gesturing to the floor and walls. I smiled faintly, ignoring the mess. "It's part of the process," I said. "You'd understand if you painted." He raised an eyebrow. "I've been buying your work for years. I know exactly what you're capable of." But even I didn't expect this intensity. Intensity. That word hit me. They all had underestimated me. Paul, Nina, the world. But Felix had quietly watched, silently admiring, never interfering. He saw me. Not the safe, polished artist I was expected to be, but the raw, fierce, untamed version I was becoming. "I've been thinking," he said, hesitating, "that you should have your own gallery show. International, not just here. You're ready. People need to see this." I stared at him, the color on my brush frozen mid-stroke. "I don't need anyone to tell me I'm ready," I said, voice firmer than I intended. But Felix didn't flinch. "I'm not telling you," he said, with that grumpy inflection that somehow made him endearing. "I'm just saying, the world should see what you're doing. You're remarkable." I felt heat rise in my chest. Not from anger, not from embarrassment, but from recognition. Finally, someone wasn't seeing me through the lens of expectation or jealousy. They saw me. By late afternoon, my phone started buzzing incessantly. Galleries in New York, London, Tokyo, they wanted to feature my work. Critics were calling it revolutionary and the next evolution of modern expression. I finally allowed myself a quiet, triumphant smile. Paul was irrelevant. Nina was irrelevant. This was my world now. That evening, Felix lingered as I cleaned brushes and prepared canvases for shipment. I watched him move about the studio, helping without being overbearing, his presence steady and reassuring. "You know," I said almost tentatively, "I never imagined someone like you could understand my work or me." He paused, meeting my gaze. "Celeste, I've always understood you. I just never had the nerve to tell you." I felt something shift, a subtle warmth, a connection that wasn't about art, or revenge, or past hurt. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to imagine a life where someone walked beside me, not ahead, not behind, but alongside. I looked around my chaotic studio, at the canvases alive with emotion and fire, and felt a surge of exhilaration. I was free. I was powerful. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to let someone share in that freedom. The morning I opened my inbox and saw the first international invitation, I nearly dropped my coffee. A gallery in Tokyo wanted my work for a solo exhibition. Not a small, local gallery. Tokyo. I pinched myself, half expecting to wake up from a dream. But the emails kept coming: London, New York, Berlin. People were seeing my dark period for what it truly was: raw, honest, unstoppable. I sank into my chair and stared at a blank canvas, my hands shaking. The truth hit me like a wave. Paul, with all his charm and control, had underestimated me. He had thought that by betraying me, he could steal my energy, my creativity, my spark. But he had only fueled it. Felix appeared as if on cue, carrying 2 coffees and a look that suggested he was trying not to smile too much. "You look like you've just seen a ghost," he said, setting the cups down. "Better," I replied, still staring at the screen. "I've just seen the world." He leaned against the edge of my studio table, arms folded. "I knew you'd get here. I've been buying your work quietly for years. I've always believed in you." I felt a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with anger or victory. Felix wasn't just supporting me because it was convenient. He had believed in me when no one else did. When I was invisible, I set down my coffee, the excitement and nervous energy almost overwhelming. I can't believe this is happening. All these years, and now, finally, they see it. "Not just see it," Felix said quietly. "They feel it. Every brushstroke, every dark shadow. You've turned your pain into something everyone can understand." The words touched me more than I expected. Pain had been my teacher, betrayal my catalyst, and now it had become my art. I realized I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Over the next few weeks, my studio became a whirlwind of activity. Shipping canvases internationally, preparing for exhibitions, coordinating interviews with critics and collectors. And through it all, Felix was there. Not as a manager, not as a critic, but as a steady presence, quietly helping me navigate this new world without ever trying to control it. One evening, after a long day of packing crates, Felix lingered in the doorway. "You know," he said softly, "I've always thought you'd change the art world. I just didn't think it would happen this fast." I laughed, exhaustion and exhilaration mixing together. "I never thought I'd get here either. But it feels right. Finally, I'm painting for me. Not Paul. Not anyone else. Just me." He nodded, eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, the noise of the world fell away. And that's exactly why I've been standing here all this time. I didn't want to miss it. You deserve to be seen, and I wanted to be here when it happened. I swallowed hard, realizing how much I had needed that. Not validation from the world. I could handle that, but someone who truly understood me, my art, my journey. Someone who saw me for me. That night, as I locked up the studio, I walked past the canvases I had painted in the chaos of betrayal and anger. Each one pulsed with life, every shadow and streak telling a story of pain turned into power. And for the first time, I didn't feel empty or bitter, I felt whole. Felix stayed behind, helping me organize the last shipment. As I turned to leave, he met my gaze and smiled, a small, reluctant, grumpy smile that felt warmer than the sun outside. "Celeste," he said quietly, "you're amazing. And don't you forget it." For the first time in months, I didn't have to. I had my art, my independence, and maybe, just maybe, someone who could walk beside me as I conquered the world. The day I finally stopped thinking about Paul felt surreal. It wasn't a single moment of triumph or confrontation. It was quiet, almost imperceptible. I was in my studio, surrounded by canvases that pulsed with life, each brushstroke a testament to everything I had survived and everything I had reclaimed. Paul had emailed again, one last attempt to manipulate me. "Let's meet. We can salvage this. Don't throw away everything we built." I stared at the words, then deleted the email. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, until the message was gone forever. I wasn't interested in salvaging anything he touched. He didn't belong in my world. Felix was there, organizing supplies, muttering under his breath about my latest shipment to London. He noticed my frown as I deleted the email. "Who's that from?" "Paul," I said flatly. Felix's expression darkened. "Not for me, but for Paul." "You've already proven you don't need him," he said. "You're unstoppable without him." I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. Unstoppable. That's right. The truth was, the more I immersed myself in my art, the more I realized Paul had never been my partner in creativity. He had been a spectator, an opportunist, someone who saw my talent but wanted to use it for himself. Betrayal had been his true masterpiece, but I was painting over it with something infinitely more powerful: freedom. That evening, I stood before a new canvas, brushing dark blues and vibrant reds across the surface. Each stroke felt like a declaration. I would not be controlled. I would not be silenced. And I would not let betrayal define me. Felix came up behind me, arms crossed but leaning slightly to watch. "You're incredible," he said softly. "People are noticing. The world, it's starting to understand what you've been doing." I smiled faintly, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with pride. "It's not about being noticed," I said. "It's about finally painting for myself. Everything else is just a bonus." He studied me for a moment, then said quietly, "I've been buying your paintings for years. I knew their worth long before anyone else did. And I want you to know, I've always believed in you." Something shifted in me, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and something tender. Felix wasn't there to compete, to criticize, or to manipulate. He was there to witness, to support, and, without saying it outright, to stand beside me. Weeks passed, and the dark period gained momentum. Galleries in Europe and Asia clamored for my work. Critics hailed my unapologetic honesty and emotional depth. People who had once doubted my vision were now calling me revolutionary. And Paul? He tried to reach out again, only to find doors closed, emails unanswered, and a reputation that could no longer leverage me. He had lost the ability to control me because I had finally learned how to own myself. One night, Felix stayed late, helping me pack a particularly large shipment bound for Tokyo. The studio was quiet except for the sound of brushes clinking against jars of turpentine. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorway, "I never liked seeing him manipulate you. I hated it. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't want to interfere." I set down a canvas, feeling the weight of his words. "You weren't interfering," I said softly. "You were waiting, watching, supporting, and that's more than anyone else has ever done." He shrugged, that familiar grumpy expression softened by something like vulnerability. "I couldn't stand by and do nothing. Not with you." For the first time, I felt completely untangled from the past. Paul was irrelevant. Nina was irrelevant. The dark period, the fire, the chaos, all of it had brought me here, to freedom, recognition, and the quiet knowledge that someone like Felix saw me for who I truly was. As the night settled over the city, I realized this was the moment I had been working toward, cutting the ties, reclaiming my art, and finally stepping into a world where I dictated the rules. And Felix was there, quietly, unwaveringly, a partner not in control, but in presence. The headlines hit me like a tidal wave. Celeste Arden, the dark period artist who redefined modern expression, read one article. Another said, "From betrayal to brilliance, how Celeste Arden turned heartbreak into global art phenomenon." I sank into my studio chair, letting the words wash over me. For years, I had painted quietly, seeking approval, trying to please Paul, trying to exist within boundaries that weren't mine. Now, the world was noticing not the safe Celeste, but the real me, raw, bold, unapologetic. Felix was there, as always, leaning against the doorway with a coffee in hand. "Looks like they finally understand what you've been doing," he said softly. "I think they're just catching up," I replied with a small smile. "They never saw me before. But now, I can't be ignored." He smiled faintly, the way he did when he wanted to hide something but couldn't. "I've never thought of you as someone who could be ignored." The truth settled over me, warmer than any recognition or headline. Felix had been watching, silently supporting, quietly believing in me long before anyone else. That quiet belief mattered more than all the praise in the world. By the end of the week, invitations were arriving from every major art capital: Paris, London, Tokyo, New York. Curators, collectors, and critics wanted to meet me, feature me, even collaborate. The dark period was no longer a phase, it was a movement. I set up a new canvas, one larger than any I had attempted, and dipped my brush into deep violet and crimson. The strokes were urgent, alive, fueled by years of betrayal and months of reinvention. Each movement was a statement. I existed on my terms now. Felix watched me work, leaning casually against a pile of canvases. "You've changed the game," he said quietly. "Paul doesn't even know what hit him." I paused, letting the thought settle. Paul had tried to manipulate me, belittle me, use me, and he had failed spectacularly. I was untouchable, not because I sought revenge, but because I had finally claimed my own voice. "I don't need him," I said, almost to myself. I never did. He was just a lesson I had to learn. Felix nodded, his gaze softening. "And you've learned it well. But maybe you should let yourself enjoy this. All of it." I laughed softly, realizing he was right. For months, I had been consumed by anger and grief. But now I could breathe. Now I could feel joy, pride, and quietly, something else. A connection, deeper than friendship, that had grown through shared silence, respect, and trust. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden light across my studio, Felix stepped closer. "Celeste," his voice was low, almost hesitant. I looked up, meeting his gaze. "Yes, I'm proud of you," he said simply. "Not just because the world sees you now, but because I've seen you all along." My chest tightened with emotion. Years of hurt, betrayal, and doubt had been replaced by something new: validation, freedom, and the quiet thrill of being understood. And in that moment, I realized just how much I wanted to share this new world with someone who had always been there, unwavering, believing in me when no one else did. He reached out, hesitated for a moment, and then gently brushed a stray lock of hair from my face. I felt my pulse quicken. Not fear, not doubt, but a tender connection I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. And then, slowly, almost shyly, we leaned closer. The first kiss was soft, lingering, not just a spark of romance, but a seal on the journey I had endured. Betrayal had been my fire, and Felix was the calm, steady light waiting on the other side. For the first time in a long while, I smiled, not at the world, not at fame, not at revenge, but at the life I had built for myself. And at the man who had always quietly stood beside me. The morning light spilled across my new studio, a space Felix had helped me find. High ceilings, wide windows, and the kind of room where imagination could run wild without limits. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and polished wood, and for the first time in months, I felt calm. Boxes of my dark period canvases were stacked neatly against the walls, ready for shipment to collectors across the globe. The chaos that had once defined me had been transformed into order, and I realized that my career was no longer at the mercy of anyone else. Not Paul, not critics, not trends. I had built something enduring. Felix was there, as always, quietly moving supplies and setting up easels. His presence had become my anchor, grounding me when my emotions threatened to spill over. I watched him, thinking about how far we had both come. He had always admired my work secretly, buying my paintings for years without my knowledge, and now he was here, supporting me openly. "I can't believe this is our space," I said, walking across the room, running my fingers over the wooden floor. "It feels like a new beginning." Felix smiled faintly, grumpy but warm, as he leaned against a counter. "It's more than that," he said. "It's proof that you've earned everything yourself. No one gave it to you. You took it." I nodded, letting the words sink in. Paul's betrayal had been the spark, but this independence, this recognition, this freedom was all mine. And Felix had been there every step of the way, not controlling me, not dictating my life, but walking beside me. The first visitor of the morning was a gallery owner from London, eager to see the new collection. As I guided her through the studio, showing her the pieces that had once been born of rage and heartbreak, I felt a quiet pride. The dark period had transformed me into something unrecognizable, not in a way that erased who I was, but in a way that amplified it. Later, when the visitor left, Felix and I lingered in the studio, the silence comfortable. I looked at him, feeling a warmth that went beyond friendship. "You know," I said softly, "I don't think I could have done any of this without you, Felix. Even if you weren't in the spotlight, even if you didn't say anything for months, you believed in me." He hesitated, then stepped closer. "I've always believed in you," he said quietly. "From the first painting I bought to the studio. And now, I don't just want to watch. I want to be here, with you for all of it." My heart skipped. I realized then that my journey of betrayal, fire, and rebirth had led me not just to professional triumph, but to love, steady, patient, understanding love. The kind that didn't demand, didn't control, but simply shared the path forward. I laughed softly, brushing a streak of paint from my cheek. "You're grumpy and stubborn, but you're mine to annoy now," I said, teasing. He smirked, his usual expression softened. "And you're reckless and fiery, but I'd follow you anywhere." As the afternoon sun bathed the studio in gold, I felt something I hadn't in years: complete peace. Paul and his petty betrayals were behind me. Nina's fleeting influence had no power over me. My dark period had ended, not with destruction, but with creation, triumph, and the recognition of my own strength. Felix reached out, taking my hand gently. I looked into his eyes, and in that quiet, steady gaze, I saw not just admiration, but partnership, trust, and love. And as we stood there, hands intertwined, I realized that the greatest masterpiece I had ever created wasn't on a canvas. It was my life, finally my own, and the bond we had forged through the storm. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. And I was doing it with someone who truly saw me, all of me, and wanted to be part of the journey.